Over to you, Chair.
Thank you, Nice, and thank you, Dr. Pramod Jaiswal. It's an honor to be part of this mega event. It is so comprehensive. I believe anyone who has missed this event would have missed something which otherwise would be so helpful in understanding the future of world order, the emerging world order. About this session, I would say that in many ways, although all the sessions, 40 plus sessions, are so important, are so interesting, but in many ways, this session is very critical to understanding the future of world order. Because the future of world order, whether someone likes it or not, to a large extent, will depend on this one country, that is China. And in that sense, understanding China is very critical to understanding the future of world order, the emerging world order. So in that sense, I feel privileged to be part of this session and the honor of having chaired or moderated this session. Thank you once again. Now, without much ado, we would right away start with the session. And I request the paper presenters to stick to the time limit, which is 7 minutes, not extendable beyond 8. So try to come up with your main formulations and summarize your presentation within 7 minutes. We will start as given in the program. And although I will mention the name of the paper presenter, but not his or her affiliation to save time. So the first paper is by Dr. N.P. Singh, and he's going to speak on rising China. Do we have Dr. N.P. Singh?
Yes, sir, we have.
All right. So please, Dr. N.P. Singh, the floor is yours, 7 minutes. Dr. Singh, are you there?
Is there? Sir, please unmute yourself.
Dr. Singh, kindly unmute yourself.
Maybe he has some technical issues, so maybe we can go with the second, sir.
Second presentation. Yes. The second presentation is by Aurangzeb Rabena, Philippine President Duterte's complex hedging approach vis-a-vis China.
Sir, myself, N.P. Singh, I'm here.
All right. So please. Yes, Dr. Nripen Singh.
Ji, sir.
Can you switch on your video also? We can't see you.
Oh. Let my video. Okay, sir.
Rising China.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Actually, my topic of the presentation is China expanding steps towards Nepal and its impact on Indo-Nepal relations. According to Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Nepal, 2017, Nepal has established diplomatic relations with 155 nations, but Indo-Nepal relation is much broader, wider, vital, and dynamic. After the declaration of constitution and establishment of federalism, Indo-Nepal relation needs to be redefined and revised in the change perspective. India needs to redesign its Nepal policy in which China's hoping must be controlled. First time Nepal and China established a diplomatic relation in 1955. They signed an agreement in 1956, and Nepal-China border inhabitants were allowed to carry out traditional trade on a barter basis. They were also allowed to visit friends and relatives for which passport, visa, or other certificates were not needed. Nepal-China interaction in the last 65 years have been driven by pragmatism and needs. In this changing situation, China increased its influence in Nepal in order to secure its southern periphery. China feels to Nepal to monitor activities in Nepal. China is likely to play a significant role in determining the Nepalese politics under the Maoist government. Government of India provides financial assistance to Nepal, focusing on creation of infrastructure at grassroots level, health, water resources, education, health and community development, upgradation of roads, and etc. Every year, India awards around 3,000 scholarships to Nepalese students for various courses at the PhD, master, bachelor, and +2 levels. These scholarships awarded in the subject like engineering, medicine, agriculture, pharmacology, computer application, business administration, music, fine arts, etc. Recently, India launched the Nepal Bharat Maitri Shiksha Karyakram for short course explore visits for Nepalese undergraduate students in the leading universities of the country. Time to time, India also organizes training program for Nepalese bureaucrats, mid-level officials, custom officials, and member of election commission. The BP Kojala and India and Nepal Foundation was set up in 1991 by a MOU signed between the Government of India and Government of Nepal. The objective of it is to foster educational, cultural understanding, scientific and cultural cooperation between both countries and to promote mutual understanding and cooperation through sharing of knowledge and professional talent in academic pursuit and technical specialization. The Nepal Bharat Library was founded in 1951 in Kathmandu. Its objective is to enhance and strengthen cultural relations and information exchange between India and Nepal. India is establishing an e-library system across Nepal. The arrangement of open border system between India and Nepal is unique. It provides immensely beneficial to the border inhabitant of both countries as it promoted their traditional ties in religions, culture, social and economic field. People of one country can cross over the border without any restrictions from any point out of 22 checkpoints. Because of ethnic and linguistic similarities, people along the two sides of India-Nepal border speaks Maithili, Hindi, Bhojpuri, and Awadhi. Their food habits, dress, and way of living are almost the same. This has promoted matrimonial relation among border inhabitants. Indian Prime Minister Sri Narendra Modi visited Nepal on August 3-4, 2014, and in his lecture, recounting history, emphasized the age-old historical and cultural relation between India and Nepal through Janakpur and Lumbini, the Himalayas and the Ganga, the Char Dham or Pashupatnath. He suggested that the constitutional drafters should be like Rishi and write an inclusive constitution to make Nepal a federal and democratic republic. Prime Minister Sri Narendra Modi agreed to Nepalese desire to review, adjust and update the Treaty of Peace and Friendship 1950 to reflect the current reality. He also agreed to resolve pending Nepal-India boundary issues once and for all. PM Modi also proposed 3 ways to enhance connectivity between both countries through highways, information ways, and transways. He announced a soft credit line for the infrastructure development and energy projects like completion of the Mid-Hill Highway and construction of Raxol-Amlesganj Kathmandu petroleum pipeline. He agreed to additional air entry point to Janakpur, Khairma, and Nepalganj. In this Nepal visit, PM Modi clearly sent a message that India believes in constructive engagement with Nepal. Chinese engagement. 21st century world relation is mainly guided by economic factors, but China's relation with Nepal is focused, security-oriented, and based on the design of balancing. China and Nepal established diplomatic relations in 1955 and signed a Treaty of Peace and Friendship in April 1960. China's core interest in Nepal has been twofold. First, to curb the anti-Chinese activities by the 20,000 strong Tibetan refugees in Nepal, and second, to increase its influence along the India-Nepal border and the Tarai region. China's engagement in Nepal takes a variety of forms like economic investment, trade, aid, infrastructure development, military assistance, diplomatic exchange, as well as cultural and educational initiatives. China has dramatically increased its aid to Nepal in recent years. 3/4 of China's aid to Nepal comes in the form of loan rather than as direct grant. All Chinese aid projects are awarded to Chinese constructors. China has been consistently make efforts to invest in mega projects like hydropower, highway, airports, telecommunication. China has constructed a 700-kilometer rail link between Tibet and Nepal. The plan is for the Shanghai-Tibet Railway to be extended to connect with Phasa, which is 80 kilometers north of Kathmandu. This railway will increase Nepal's option and will reduce the dependency upon Kolkata port for both export and import. In recent years, Chinese People's Liberation Army and Nepalese Army have established a military assistance program, including the supply of non-lethal equipment, training, infrastructure development, and the change of high-level delegations. A number of China study centers have been established in Nepal in order to promote cultural and language exchange with the Nepali people. A Confucius Institute was established at Kathmandu University, where Nepali students now learn Chinese. Branch of China Radio International is set up in Kathmandu, including the Nepali service to teach Chinese language. Government of China and Nepal have been working together to increase tourist number to Nepal, and Nepal waiving visa fee for Chinese visitors. China engaged in Nepal informed by a variety of specific interests. China's engagement with Nepal is strongly shaped by the One China policy. This referred to China's own sovereignty and territorial claims. Nepal government would not allow to any anti-Chinese activities in Nepalese soil by Tibetan refugees who enjoy considerable sympathy and support in India. OBOR is ambitious mega project introduced by China government with the aim of promoting connectivity and cooperation among the SAARC and beyond. It has aimed to...
Dr. Singh, I request you to please summarize and wind up. 1 minute.
Yes. Nepal became a market of Chinese goods in its right, but more important that it could also be a gateway to the market of South Asia. Nepal is economically weak and internally vulnerable, and thus less able to resist Chinese interference. Ongoing political crisis in Nepal has created the ideal condition for China to increase its leverage and influence over Nepal. Weakness and collapse of Nepal would offer an opportunity for China to engage directly in South Asia. A recent situation of India-Nepal relations. India-Nepal relations reached to unexpected turning point. Consequences of this situation, Nepal government claimed 3 Indian territories to be their own: Kalapani, Lipu Lake, and Lipuria, which total area is 335 square kilometers. Government of Nepal not only claimed these Indian territories, but published a new map showing these areas to be in Nepal also. The fact that Nepal made the territorial claim when China was making fresh incursions into East Ladakh and occupying Indian territory gave rise to suspicions that it was not a fortuitous coincidence, but both developments were well connected. Over observing this mishappening in India-Nepal relation, on this issue, the Indian Foreign Office spokesman person Sri Vikas Swarup made a statement that Nepal is sovereign country and is free to have diplomatic friendship with all the neighbors. But the roti beti ka rishta which Nepal and India share can never be replicated by any other countries. Observing the mishappening, the India-Nepal relation, India government should be very cautious to maintain a harmonious relation with Nepal. First, she should try to identify the major cause of changing behavior of Nepal towards India. Why has Nepalese establishment consistently resisted India while welcoming to China? Second, India must
Dr. Singh, please
economic development.
wind up.
Yes, sir. Just 1 minute, sir. India and China both, it is highly... Later on, Nepal will realize that India is real friend, and making territorial claim on India is playing in the hand of China. In the long run, it will harm rather than help Nepal. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Singh. The topic is very relevant. He basically discussed the details as well as the complexities of bilateral and trilateral interaction between India, Nepal, and China. The issue is very sensitive and complicated. He brought out certain complexities. I hope it will be discussed during the Q&A session. The next presenter is Aaron Rabena.
Okay, can you hear me, sir?
Yes, we can. Please, go ahead.
All right. Good evening again, sir, from Manila. My thanks to Dr. Pandey for this invitation to take part in this year's nice conference. It's a great pleasure. So what I want to talk about is about President Duterte's approach or policy towards China. I guess you might have noticed that over the past few years, President Duterte of the Philippines has been condemned for his allegedly suboptimal policy for failing to rein in China's assertiveness in the South China Sea. Two issues in particular stand out. First is that President Duterte's subservient rhetoric towards China and apparent disregard for the 2016 arbitral award, the South China Sea, which the previous Aquino administration won. The former refers to President Duterte's statements, such as China is in possession of the South China Sea, the Philippines is indebted to China, and that he would not risk war with China in settling the South China Sea issue. Because of this, he has been blamed by domestic critics of viewing things in black and white, or that the recourse against China is only between war and peace. President Duterte also allegedly echoed China's official position that the 2016 arbitral award cannot be enforced as it is a mere piece of paper, contradicting his earlier speech at the UN General Assembly, where he said that the award is now part of international law, beyond compromise and beyond the reach of passing governments to dilute, diminish, or abandon. We firmly reject attempts to undermine it. End of quote. These criticisms of President Duterte, I would say, are mostly observations at the individual level of analysis. This is important, I would say, because in the hierarchy of policy statements, that of the president or head of state matters the most, especially that in the Philippines, the president is the chief architect of the country's foreign policy. The Duterte administration has also been accused of lacking in coherent strategy because while President Duterte maintains a conciliatory tone towards China or has made pro-China remarks, bureaucratic organizations such as the Department of Foreign Affairs and the Department of National Defense remain critical of China. They continue to file diplomatic protests and have consistently made pro-US statements. I would say that this could be explained by analyzing things at the organizational level. In other words, there is more than meets the eye of President Duterte's China policy or policy rhetoric towards China. Relatedly, not only has the modernization of the armed forces of the Philippines continued, for example, procurements from India, we are set to acquire BrahMos missiles and new frigates from South Korea. We have also continued to receive military hardware from the United States, and we have also continued to conduct military exercises with the Americans. One could even argue that the Philippines-US alliance has become stronger under President Duterte because America's commitment to the Philippines became clearer, and this was assured by Secretary of State, then Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, that they would help the Philippines in the event of an armed attack in the South China Sea. Whereas during the Obama administration, the often made statements were that the US does not take sides on issues of competing maritime and territorial claims. In fact, the decision to continue the visiting forces agreement with the United States could also show that President Duterte can be convinced and listens to his advisors. And he can also give in to public pressure, or it could be out of domestic politics considerations so that he can deflect domestic criticisms against him. After all, the scrapping of the suspension of the visiting forces agreement was impulsively done so because not because of attempts to appease China, but because of human rights issues criticisms by the United States. And for us to have a broad appreciation, of President Duterte's independent foreign policy, it is not enough to just look at the US-China dialogue. For example, the Philippines has strongly engaged with the Quad countries, such as Japan, Australia, and India, and has carried out military exercises with all of them individually and simultaneously. Furthermore, it is important to note that the Duterte government rejected China's bid to develop Subic Port. It is a port strategically located facing the South China Sea in the Philippines island of Luzon. In fact, it is American and Australian companies that have been considered to develop this particular port. Similarly, when there were reports in 2019 that China will develop Fuga Island in the north of the Philippines, that is very near to Taiwan in 2019. President Duterte ordered that 20 hectares of it be allotted for the creation of a naval base. And despite the media hype that China is dominating Chinese projects in the Philippines, it is actually Japan that remains the country's largest source of ODA. Based on these, one can argue that the Duterte government has engaged in selective or cautious engagement vis-a-vis China. Notably, President Duterte, besides his defeatist statements, is also a man of contradiction. This was very evident in the run-up to his presidential candidacy in 2016, where he kept saying that he will not run for president, but at the last minute did so. Thus, in relation to his defeatist statements and contradictory statements, he has also made remarks such as, daring the United States, France, and the UK to help the Philippines claim its territories in the South China Sea, and that he will dispatch the Navy if China unilaterally drills for oil in the South China Sea. And when he was asked whether the alliance with the US should be abrogated, he said that it is not for him alone to decide. So this means that he cares about what his cabinet members think. In conclusion, with the foregoing facts and observations, it can be said that the mixed signals coming from the Philippine government or the Duterte government could mean two things. First, a naturally inconsistent foreign policy, or second, a deliberate ploy to sow confusion. Regardless, the outcome has somewhat served the purpose of strategic ambiguity. And also, President Duterte's strategic alignment with the US has now less political color because of strengthening ties with China. Given this, President Duterte's foreign policy may be said to be one of complex hedging, I would say complex hedging, not conventional hedging. This is because unlike traditional hedging, where policy actions towards one state is being countered by policy action towards another state, in this case, policy rhetoric is being offset by policy engagement vis-a-vis other states. And if President Duterte is guilty of acts of appeasement of China, he has also committed acts of balancing. Then this goes to show that his government is engaged in hedging. So I will end my remarks here, and thank you all so much for listening.
Thank you, Aaron, first for your excellent presentation, and then also for sticking to time limit. In fact, clarifying and simplifying a very complicated issue. On the one hand, there is public perception and public pronouncements by President Duterte himself, which seem to suggest that he is following a pro-China policy. But then you have amply shown how it is much more complex and nuanced. It's a policy of multiple engagements and a policy of hedging. All right, so thank you very much. Excellent presentation, I would say. I'm very sure there would be questions on this. Our next presenter is Dr. Xiaoyu, and he has not given his topic, but I'm very sure he will highlight one of the complicated aspects of Chinese perception and Chinese policy.
Okay, thank you. So my topic for today is China's evolving role in Asia. So in many parts of the world, there is an increasing sort of perception that China is trying to play a dominant role or even hegemonic role, first in Asia and ultimately in the globe or around the world. So we see publications, academic articles, even policy papers. Increasingly, that's an assumption. China wants to be number one, first in Asia, and eventually the whole globe. So my own observation is that this assumption is much more contested, both in China and internationally. So what kind of role does China want to play, first in Asia and then in the world? So many years ago, during the global financial crisis, I co-authored a paper with my former advisor, Professor Randy Schweller, the paper called After Unipolarity. At that point, we envisioned that China could play potentially three roles in the emerging international order. First, China could be a spoiler, delegitimize the existing order and replace it with something entirely new. Second, China could be a supporter. China could contribute more to the existing international order. The third is China could be a shirker, prioritize domestic growth while shirking from taking greater responsibilities. Many years later, we realized the three roles, to some degree, they are still relevant. But increasingly, of course, in the Xi Jinping era, we see China's foreign policy has become much more assertive, much more active. So maybe it does not make much sense to still emphasize China is play a shirking role. So I think now China could potentially could play a co-leader role, sort of like co-leading in multilateral platforms. So regarding China's future role, I want to highlight two factors. One is balance of power. The second is legitimacy, international legitimacy. So what kind of role China wants to play largely depend on these two factors. The first is the shift in balance of power. My overall observation is that China's rise is real. So are China's limitations. Think about China's GDP, China's military budget, military spending. Both indicators have already accounted for more than half of the total in Asia. But there are a lot of limitations for China to project its power, both domestic constraints and also international constraints. So in terms of balance of power, there are limitations. The second is legitimacy, how China or Chinese elites see the legitimacy of the existing order. So on the one hand, Chinese government is unsatisfied with some aspect of the current international order, but China has also benefited a lot from the current order. So in this sense, it does not make sense for China to entirely damage the current order and replace the order with something entirely new. More likely, China wants to muddle through, try to modify some aspect of current order, but also still maintain much of the current order. So in that sense, I think China does not want to be a revolutionary power to fundamentally change the current order, but China wants to modify the current order to some degree, largely because how China see the current legitimacy of the existing international order. So let me briefly summarize my key point. Number one is that I assume China is surely want to play a larger role. China surely wants to play a more important role in Asia and around the world. But that does not mean China has the intention to be a hegemonic power first in Asia and then around the globe. I think that proposition is much more contested, both in China and around the world. And the second, shirking does not work for China anymore. China cannot hide, cannot shirk anymore. So China must play a more active role to some degree. But that does not mean this is always bad. So to some degree, if China could play a sort of co-leadership role, China could contribute more to international public goods. So in that sense, co-leading role is an ideal goal for China. But again, that also depends on how Chinese elites evaluate balance of power and also legitimacy of the current international system. Okay, let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Xiao, again, firstly for keeping to the time limit, and then dealing with a very complex issue and clarifying it for the better understanding of China. As you very rightly said, China wants to partially modify or change the current order as well as preserve it in many ways. So it's a very nuanced policy. I'm very sure there will be questions and discussion on that. Thank you very much for your very good presentation. Our next presenter is Samprity Biswas. Samprity?
Yes, sir. I hope I'm audible, sir.
Yes, you are. Very much.
So with your permission, I would just like to share my screen. I have a PPT presentation to make.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Well, my topic is the ideational underpinnings of Russia-China relations and the implications it will have for the international order. To begin with, we all know that presently the Russia-China partnership has acquired the status of a robust, comprehensive strategic partnership. However, most literature have taken a realist view of the Russia-China engagement, and these literature have argued that Russia-China relations are devoid of any ideological root. Hence, it is bound to face a high uncertainty in the future. However, through this presentation, I seek to rationalize that the realist arguments are restrictive in its analysis because it leaves out the ideational motivations that underlie this relationship. So what are these ideational motivations? I am going to talk about the adopted image of national identity in both Russia as well as in China. And then I'm going to show how in both the countries, the national identity debates are essentially anti-West. And my second point is where I'm going to talk about the shared political norms between Russia and China. That of course is anti-West, and ever since the Crimean crisis in 2014, Russia has been siding with China. So that is one of my arguments. So here I want to show why national identity is an ideational construct. Now, ideational basically means anything that has to do with ideas, beliefs, norms, worldviews, identity. So why do I argue that national identity is an ideational construct? Here I have taken the case of Russia. Like, national identity of any country is always in a flux. And to understand the debates about national identity of any country, we have to look into history. Like in the case of Russia, we can see how Russia's historical patterns have determined Russia's identity debate, because whenever West have given recognition to Russia, the pro-West narratives within Russia and the pro-West coalitions within Russia have gained an upper hand. And whenever the West have withheld such recognition, we have seen that how the anti-West coalitions have gained an upper hand. Secondly, the role of elites in foreign policy leadership is also important. Now, here I talk about the human agency. These foreign policy leadership, the elites, they also have a major role in selecting the image of national identity. And here, in the case of Russia, the specific role of President Putin is important because recently, ever since the estrangement with the West have happened, we have seen how President Putin has emphasized on the civilizational norms of Russia. Now, I wish to argue that identity is a causative factor underlining Russia-China engagement, because in both these countries, the formations of identity is happening because of very similar reasons. Now, in the case of Russia, we can see President Putin's pragmatic Eurasianism, Russia's present national identity is revolving around the concept of pragmatic Eurasianism. Now, what is pragmatic Eurasianism? In the words of Richard Sakwa, it is marrying traditional Eurasianist philosophy with that of Mikhail Titarenko's Sinophile Eurasianism. So basically, the traditional Eurasianist philosophy, they are xenophobic in nature. However, President Putin is moving towards China, have adopted a pro-Chinese policy, because here it can be seen that he has married the Titarenko's Sinophile Eurasianism with traditional Eurasianist philosophy. In general, this Eurasianist philosophy is espousing the creation of a Russia-centered civilizational space that will respect plurality of people and civilizations. Similarly, in China, we can see that how in China the whole image of national identity is being determined by three particular philosophy. One is socialism, second is Confucianism, and the third is anti-hegemonism. Now, these three at the same time is also talking about a pluralistic understanding of international relations. So here we can see that there is similarity between Russia and China when it comes to adopting the image of national identity, because they have a positive reading of their history. Both Russia and China are resorting to a positive reading of their history. They are emphasizing on their specificity vis-a-vis the West, while on one hand, Russia is asserting a specificity by adopting Eurasianist philosophy. On the other hand, China is talking about Confucianist teachings. And both Eurasianism and Confucianism, we can see, are talking about the principles of sovereignty, non-intervention, non-aggression, mutual benefit, great power benevolence. Then China, of course, talks about the whole concept of harmony without uniformity. So both Eurasianist philosophy of Russia as well as the Chinese understanding of its national identity, which is determined by Confucian philosophy, socialism, and anti-hegemonism, are basically talking about the creation of a relationship system, which is in the Chinese terminology is termed as the Guangxi Wang, which basically means a pluralistic system that will resonate, that at the same time resonates with Russia's Eurasianism, because both these philosophies are talking about integrating different people and principles, thus generating civilizational views and discourses. Thus, these similarities underpinning the national identity formation in both Russia and China are actually lending an ideological root to these countries. They are sort of giving a normative dimension. So for the realists who argue that there is no ideological root in this relationship is devoid of any ideological root, they're basically not looking into these factors. There are strong ideational factors that are actually binding these two countries and lending a normative dimension to their relationship. Next, I move on to the consensual political norms. Now, both Russia and China share certain political norms, and these political norms are acting as a source of their identities, in the sense that they are influencing their adopted image of national identity in both the countries. And at the same time, they're also kind of influencing both Russia and China's worldviews, because we have seen in the recent past how Russia and China have come to share very similar views on major regional and international issues, be it on Iran, on Afghanistan, on Korea, on Syria. So I want to highlight what are these shared political norms. Of course, these are the principles of sovereignty, multipolarity, multilateralism, equality of states. And these have been very much highlighted in the bilateral agreements and the joint statements that have been signed by both Russia and China. To name a few, I have named like the most important documents here. So like all these documents that have been signed, and apart from these documents, even the speeches of the presidents, they have also highlighted how both the countries are actually clamoring to create a just and fair new world order, where they want to highlight the whole concept of pluralistic understanding of the international. And that is why they are actually stressing on going back to the traditional repertoire of international law. Like in the previous presentation, it has already been said that China does not want to change the international order as such, but it definitely wants to modify it. And how does it want to modify it? It wants to emphasize on the traditional repertoire of international law. It is very much both Russia and China. It is against the modifications that have been introduced by the Western powers. For example, the responsibility to protect principle, humanitarian interventions, these that have been introduced. China, both Russia and China are very much against these interventions. So they are basically harping on the traditional repertoire of international law, where they are talking about territorial and governmental sovereignty. They're talking about multipolarity, and also the moment they are talking about multilateralism and multipolarity, these are actually working in their favor, because it is positioning both Russia and China in a way that is actually leading them to lead the struggle in the international system, based on the like international system, and they can actually have a say in the principles and the logics of the world order. With that, I would like to end my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Samprity, again for keeping to time, and also for dealing with an interesting and complex issue. Many a times, relations between two countries, and especially large countries, great powers, there is an attempt to denigrate it by saying that it is mostly geopolitical, pragmatic, realpolitik. There is no ideological underpinning. You very rightly tried to highlight the various ways in which the worldviews of the two countries, that is Russia and China, they are similar. And in that sense, there is more to the relationship than mere geopolitics. Thank you very much. The next presentation is by Kondaraju Sandeep. Sandeep.
Am I audible, sir?
Yes, you are. Can you also switch on your camera?
Yes, sir, it is, sir.
Yes, you are visible. Please.
Sir, greetings to you. My title of the presentation is China as a nation of potential in the multiplicity here. President Xi Jinping began establishing the next phase of foreign policy in its issues since 2013, following his predecessor's footsteps. However, the Belt and Road Initiative was pleased with its economic development and began marketing its China dream through Belt and Road Initiative. Meanwhile, the Chinese recognize they need to look beyond Asia's border to refute their negative perceptions of China, that is China threat theory, because China as a nation is viewed with suspicion by its neighbor and the extended ones. The Chinese engage their way to the forefront of world affairs. Belt and Road Initiative generally is a network of goods, services, investment, technology, and human capital flows in broad terms. While the current phase of BRI has been primarily focused on economic and institutional relations with significant diplomatic ties, the next step is to likely to take on a much more concrete strategic flavor of exceptionalism of China. The Chinese have welcomed a new era of economic development, industrialization, trade with open arms, but the US-led quadrilateral security dialogue and their threat perceptions and misunderstanding have laid the groundwork for counter grand strategy crossovers. And China is focusing on cooperation protection, has increasingly been viewed as a nation of consequence by significant states in the region and elsewhere, potentially playing a critical role in maintaining regional stability. and considered a new power play willing to uphold existing rules as the world's most populous country, socialist and committed to policy of non-intervention in international affairs of other states and minimal direct conflict with other states. Tensions have grown stronger as China growing confidence has increased tensions in the East and Southeast Asia, South China Seas, and direct competition between China and the US and its allies has begun to manifest itself more clearly in Asia Pacific or Indo-Pacific. The Xi Jinping administration must continue to emphasize the structural and functional economic and strategic ties with Asia Pacific, pledging to act more to advance these interests, not to just frame the policies on paper. China's economic objectives and strategies have become focal point on Asian trade and commerce due to reforms and transformation. The economies into more open-oriented towards building more vital supply chains. Beijing needs to connect the Chinese economy to expand trade with Asia to be figured in absolute terms, but the overall result has been substandard. However, China continues to be Asia's largest trading partner. That is, exports reported result in positively 3.7% in 2019 to 20 period, with two-way trade, which appears quite ambitious in terms of establishing a comparative advantage in services on the current trajectory compared to quadrilateral security dialogue countries. China hopes to reduce its trade deficit with various states and continues to run and troubleshoot a significant trade deficit balance with the rest of the world. Where China diplomatic objectives and strategies are centered on integration into regions and institutional legal framework by seeking closer integration and strategic advancement and the same time maintain economic and strategic autonomy is a benefiting greater flexibility now than a formal alliance, which would provide through ad hoc coalitions. Asian states are becoming more critical of the US and are looking for signs that the US is banning its stabilizing role in Asia. China has been determined to strengthen its strategic ties with Asian states to foster a global partnership, diplomatic exchanges, critical maritime connectivity, and growing international responsibilities. China has signed several MOUs on cooperation in defense industry, logistics, collaboration, assistance, and international peacekeeping. Where Chinese defense and security objectives has to intensify the comprehensive defense modernization program that has elevated its reputation as a nation of consequence in the region, while the naval modernization program has provided it with a significant capability to exert influence and contribute constructively to the protection of the maritime commons, where the East and South China Seas region has noted that these developments in light of China's potential role in maritime security, where Belt and Road Initiative has to strengthen strategic ties with neighboring countries to defend its core commercial interests, physical protection of shipping passes through significant waters and choke points, and support for international standards on freedom of the maritime commons and open sea lines of communication, where US did not sign the UN clause 2. And at the same time, China has embraced in two ways due to convergence of interest between China and Asian nations, specifically the Indian Ocean and Pacific Ocean, regarding the ensuring freedom of navigation in the East and South China Seas and regional stability. As part of a strategy to counter attempts to maintain greater leverage by keeping these disputes bilateral, the various claimants and other states such as Japan, US, and Australia have sought to internationalize the conflict by putting it directly on the agenda of regional institutions such as ASEAN Regional Forum and East Asia Summit, where ASEAN, Japan, South Korea have all expressed a desire to strengthen bilateral cooperation to entice India to act as a secondary balancer in the Indo-Pacific and South and East Asia, China Sea, where Sino-centric concerns are bolstering naval collaboration in East Asia. Since 2012, greater Chinese assertiveness was viewed with alarm and interpreted as China's attempt to re-establish its dominance over Asia during Middle Kingdoms, while strengthening its ties with India contributes to both India's and quadrilateral security dialogue soft balancing strategies against China, with the latter looking to India for external support in addition to its US alliance. Thus, China's involvement in East and South China Sea disputes implies that it's utilizing its superior defense technology to assist more minor claimants in developing to resist coercive behavior and more broadly defend the norms of freedom of navigation. In sum up, China is regarded as a considerable power player and a crucial factor in East Asia, largely Asia security dynamics, as it has grown significantly over the last 3 decades. China's role in the Indo-Pacific is beginning to take shape. While it is not at full significant force, its military capabilities and shared interests with Asian states in defending existing regional norms have raised expectations about its role. If tensions continue to rise and to demonstrate comprehensive declaration on East and South China Sea, and its desire to alter the status quo have compelled QSG states to collaborate more overtly on hard and soft counterbalances to its growth. The fundamental objective is to safeguard the regional order in Asian norms, particularly access the maritime common, and to resolve conflicts amicably through the application of established legal principles. While actual confrontation is far from certain to result from these disagreements, China's increased willingness to defend established norms of the regional order diplomatically under China's leadership has boosted expectations that quadrilateral security dialogue will be willing to go beyond expression. However, China's strategic culture and demand for strategic autonomy make it a reliable partner for new types of endeavor. Thank you. I rest my argument here, sir.
Presentation dealing with rise of China, the type of anxieties and apprehensions it creates among the neighbors, and the rivalry it generates with US, but China's balanced approach in a way, one may say, and its multi-pronged strategy. Thank you very much also for mentioning that word Middle Kingdom. I hope and believe that some of the other presenters, especially Dr. Kiao, will perhaps talk something about. We students of international relations often talk about China's Middle Kingdom complex and quote-unquote century of humiliation, and how Chinese approach, identity and policy has been shaped by these two. We would like to hear more on that. Thank you very much, Sandeep.
Thank you, sir.
The next presenter is Mritika Guha Sarkar, and she will be speaking on 100 years of the Communist Party of China and Xi Jinping's regional military ambitions in new era. Yes. Mritika, are you there? Mritika is there, or she hasn't joined?
She has joined another session. For this session, we have Dr. Anwar.
All right. So
Anwar is speaking on 100 years of CPC.
All right. All right. So can we have the presentation, Anu?
Yes. Yes. Thank you, first of all, for inviting me.
All right. Dr. Anu Anwar.
Yes. Can you hear me good?
Yes, please, please. And the topic is same.
No, I will be speaking of understanding the rise of China.
All right. Even better.
Thank you. We have seen in international relation that, especially in last century, we heard the word, the rise of China so often in the international relation discourse. So I want to shed the light on how the rise on China happened and what are the components there. In my view, there is the two factor basically that shape the rise of China. It's a combination of two factors. One of them is the change in international structure, and another is the sequence of historical event. So if we look at the change in the international structure, is that after Second World War, even after the we have seen bipolar order, USS versus Soviet Union versus US. After the Cold War, we have seen the unipolar world. So in this entire period, China has almost invisible in the global power structure and so on and so forth. But China's ascendancy started after the Chinese Deng Xiaoping opening and reform process. And since then, we have seen that China started to play a greater role, largely because of the Chinese economic development. And this economic development is miraculous in many ways. So one can argue that Chinese rise is basically the rise of Chinese economic power, where we have seen that China 20, 30 years ago, the GDP was less than $2 or $3 trillion, and now is the $14 trillion, world second largest economy in the world. So that gave China enormous power to play a greater role in the international structure, international organization, and so on and so forth. So that is the one part of the international structural part. And the other part is basically the sequence of historical event. There is some major event happen in the world where those events basically gave China opportunity to play a much greater role. So first of all, we can mention that 2001 in the 9/11, when it happened, the Western power led by US basically broke down in the Middle East and all other counter-terrorism insurgency. So this gave China basically a strategic opportunity to national building and consolidate Chinese power around Asia. So that basically is the foundation that how China started to play a greater role in the regional affair and the global affair at the same time, building the China as a nation that can lead and play greater role in the future. The second event in the world affair, biggest event happened in the world affair, is the financial crisis, global financial crisis in 2007 and 8. When we have seen that after the Soviet Union collapse, Western lead liberal international order and the capitalism was seen as one of the major way forward to development, and China also to some extent follow the Western economic model. But after that financial crisis, we have seen that Western world and many part of the world has impacted severely and negatively in many ways. But at the same time, we have seen the Chinese economy was not affected as the way the Western world was affected. And therefore, the Chinese leadership gave a kind of, came to a kind of conclusion that, well, they might have some kind of leverage over the Western model of development, and therefore their model may be sustainable and to some extent can play a greater role in global affair in the future. And at the same time also that the Chinese economy was not affected, rather than it developed to some extent, and its growth has been continued. And the sense the world get is quite different that Western versus Chinese model. And also 2008, we have seen that the Olympic taken place in Beijing. That was a kind of a spectacular way to show the Chinese modern development, progress, and economic miracle. So that is another kind of signal to the world that China is not the China it has been 20 or 30 years ago. And at last, another biggest global event that taken place that we are still experiencing, that is the pandemic, global pandemic and COVID-19. Even though we, as of now, we understand that it has started in China, but since then, as it is spread it all over the world, now we are getting more clearer picture that how different government is handling the COVID crisis and what is the impact of this global pandemic in their domestic politics, economy, and the global role. So we have seen that the beginning stage China response was rather not very efficient, and many way we can argue it was kind of catastrophic. But China has come back so rapidly, and it enhanced its response, and in many way it contained the virus and handle the pandemic is way much better than many other countries we would expect to see. They are doing better. So at the same time, Chinese economy also bounced back and play a greater role in supplying the whether vaccine and so on and so forth. So to some extent, this global pandemic also played a favorable role to that narrative of China's rise. So combination of this international structure and this sequence of historical event, in my view, that is the basically shape the narrative of rise of China. Now, from here going forward, and I think the Professor Xiaoyu also mentioned that challenges are abundant, and there is so many domestic international environment as China go forward is not favorable, and especially Chinese border country, domestic affair. So how this will evolve in the coming decade and in the future, that yet to be seen. But as of now, we have seen that the rise of China has ascended. I will conclude there.
Thank you, Anwar, for helping us better understand China's rise. Multiple factors you mentioned, how the international structure from bipolar to unipolar, and how during the last 20 years, when the US and the West was preoccupied with Afghanistan and Iraq and Arab Spring and whatnot, and Russia, Ukraine and all. And in the meantime, very slowly but surely, the dragon was rising, and it was not noticed. So thank you for highlighting it. And also the fact that China has shown itself as a better manager of crises and problems, or even mega events like Olympics, or the financial crisis, or the recent pandemic. So the way China could bounce back, and has definitely created acceptance for Chinese management skills and China's model of development. So thank you for highlighting all that, Anwar. The next presenter is Aakriti Vinayak.
Yes, sir. Hi, I'm here. I'm just sharing my screen, sir.
Please, Aakriti, yes.
Can you view my screen, sir?
Yes, we can see it.
So actually, I'm facing some internet connection, so I'll just keep my video off if that's okay.
That's fine.
Yeah.
As long as we can see your presentation, yes.
Yes, sir. So,
but at the end, please switch on the video at the end.
Yes, sir. Hello, everyone. So the topic of my presentation is the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, Understanding the Slowdown and the Backlash. So actually, a lot has been already said about China-Pakistan Economic Corridor and the grand narrative which is being, showcased about CPEC. However, my presentation aims to understand why the project is facing a slowdown and why there's a backlash in Pakistan with regards to this project. So I'll just begin with just quickly, telling about little bit about the project, and then quickly coming to what are the issues which, Pakistan is facing as regards to CPEC. Actually, this project is in the larger part of the Chinese dream or the China's grand Belt and Road Initiative. It's a flagship project, and it was launched in 2015, and it has a range of projects. As we all know, that there are power plants, transport corridors. There's an industrial belt spanning from Kashmir in Xinjiang to port of Gowada on the Arabian Sea. So there are a range of projects which CPEC envision, and we do see that it's divided into two phases. The first phase was about industrial projects and was about power projects. And the second phase, which CPEC is more about electricity project, more about, SEZs and other industrial zones. However, from the beginning itself, CPEC has been facing, there has been controversies, and there has been there has been questions regarding to the viability of the project. So it's not that the project is facing a backlash or a slowdown right now, but from the beginning itself, there has been controversies around the project, especially domestically, and both externally, the project was facing questions. We see that internally, there was domestic politics in Pakistan regarding to the route controversies, that where will be the CPEC route will be. And there was also corruption, there was also bureaucratic crisis. Externally, we do know that India has an objection to CPEC because it passes through Jammu and Kashmir, and we have our territorial and sovereignty issues regarding to that. And US also questioned the economic feasibility of the project. With regard to coming to the slowdown and the backlash, and coming to the situation, the ground level situation of the project, we do see that not a lot has been achieved on the project, as just out of 122 announced projects, only a quarter, that is only 32 projects have been completed, which is roughly like 20 billion of the estimated 87 billion in funding. In fact, large scale projects have been shelved, such as Daimar Bhasha Dam, the Pakistan-Iran gas line, and the Muzaffarnagar coal power projects, which they have been largely shelved or dropped down. However, with regard to the energy sector, the country has become energy surplus, but there has been issues there also, because the unit cost of power production is too high for the local people to afford. So, and also in the energy sector, also there has been a report regarding the corruption in the sector. In fact, this report called Committee for Power Sector Audit, Circular Debt Reservation and Future Roadmap. This was a report which was released. It listed 100 billion Pakistan rupees malpractices in tune of 100 billion Pakistan rupees in the independent power generating sector, which is at least third of its relating to the Chinese project. So that was quite revealing that this report released as related to the corruption for the project. Coming to the centerpiece of the project, that is the Gowada. There has been some progress there too, but the Gowada project is in Balochistan province of Pakistan. However, there has been some progress, but the construction around the city, and there's a lot of things still needs to be done, and there's also question of economic viability there. Now coming to the economic factors, that is the project really economically viable? So as we know, that Pakistan has always been has a troublesome economy, and a lot of promises were made that Pakistan economy will be uplifted by CPEC. However, the situation has been different, because we do see these aggressive and non-transparent Chinese financing terms, in fact, have increased Pakistan's debt and balance of payment crisis. In fact, as a result of CPEC result import spending, we do see the current account deficit has nearly increased 700%. So that's a lot. And in fact, according to one estimate, Pakistan could end up repaying Beijing a CPEC-related investment portfolio, initially worth USD 50 billion to something to around USD 90 billion over a span of 30 years. That's not it. In fact, we do see that the country is, which a lot of people and a lot of analysts have been said, that country is slowly losing its sovereignty and its land, and it will not be able to repay so much. And that's why the question of debt trap comes in. There was a very important report released by Center for Global Development, where it has put Pakistan in the risk of debt distressed countries, as related to the high interest rates being charged by Pakistan, by China. In fact, Institute of Policy Reforms, it's a Lahore-based think tank, it released a report saying that Pakistan has already slipped into a debt trap due to government's failure to bring reforms and weak fiscal management. So the situation is not really good as when we see the economic situation, but there is more to it, especially related to the security related questions. We do see that this Pakistan's economy is going through a rough phase, but the most important point is that the project is facing a lot of security challenges. There have been reports of terrorists targeting Chinese investments and citizens, in fact, and it's facing an increased threat from Balochistan, which is the home of the key project, that is the Gowada port. And Baloch separatists have carried out an attack against Chinese workers and engineers. In fact, recently there was a suicide bomber attack, and BLA has taken the responsibility of it just a few days back. In fact, there's a report being, which Pakistan newspaper Dawn had released, that there's going to be fencing plan, in fact, to protect Gowada from attack from Baloch nationalists. And this is going to be a security surveillance area because the situation is pretty bad there. And we do see that, in fact, a report by International Crisis Group, it's saying that there is rising discontent in Balochistan itself because there is no direct financial benefits from Gowada port, and it's becoming a militarized zone, and it's being displayed. It is displacing locals and depriving them from the economic lifelines. So there's been a lot of discontent among the locals. One of the aspects which we do miss when we study CPEC is the human rights violations being going on. So there have been reports of displacements along the Makran coast and other parts affected by CPEC throughout Balochistan, as well as project sites in Gowada, which have caused really internal displacements. In fact, a very revealing aspect is that Balochistan's right to information laws are considered to be weakest in the country. In the light of CPEC, there's lack of access to the information itself. And, several journalists have in fact criticized the lack of new laws, saying that it hampers their ability to report effectively in Balochistan as related to CPEC. There's also reports in Gilgit-Baltistan about usurping of land by government and other institutions. So clearly, because of this situation, there has been, a lot of anti-China sentiment, and we do see local population in Balochistan, Gilgit-Baltistan, POK, and they're voicing their concerns against this project. They're complaining about land grab. They're complaining about forced displacement, migration. They're in fact questioning. They are also questioning the environmental problems, that is pollution, deforestation. So not a lot has been achieved there. There's also rise of cases of suspected bride trafficking from Pakistan to China, which has been which has come more when China-Pakistan corridor has come. There's been an unprecedented influx of tens of thousands of Chinese nationals in the country, and we do see that the suspected drive, some 6 to 9 Pakistani girls were sold as brides to China. So that's a really revealing number when it comes to the project. Another aspect which we put a very scanty attention to is the environmental degradation caused by CPEC to Pakistan. In fact, Pakistan is ranked as one of the 10 most vulnerable countries to the climate change. And due to CPEC, it's projected that from 2015 and 2030, as a result of CPEC construction, there will be glacier melting, there will be excessive flooding, there will be drought events in Pakistan. In fact, there's a project in Sindh, the coal-based project in Sindh. It's damaging the environment and also displacing the locals, and a lot of problems people are facing there. Coming to the numbers, 38% of the generation capacity from the active CPEC projects is coming from coal. So in fact, there's been assurances being given by China to address this problem, but still the problem has not been addressed. In fact, we do see that Pakistan's National Electric Power Regulatory Authority, that is NEPTA, it expects that CPEC coal projects will be largely responsible for projected increase in country's coal-fired generation capacity from 3% to 20% in 2025.
Aakriti,
yes,
can you please summarize and...
This is the last, sorry. This is the last thing which we think. Sorry. So just last bit about the economic, that there's been a lot of massive tree cutting drive in Gowada, and because new roads are being constructed. So we do see a 7,000 trucks per day on Karakoram highway, which is releasing some 36.5 million tons of carbon dioxide. So a lot of questions there on the environmental side. So coming just quickly to the conclusion, as Sir said that I just have a very less time. So coming to the conclusion, I want to just put this one thing, that though on the high tables, we do see a lot of deals being signed, a lot of narratives being pushed on that CPEC is progressing, especially after the COVID-19 crisis. There was a lot of news that there's a backlash and there's slowdown, but on the high tables, this is not being projected. But when we look at the ground situation, the situation is pretty bad. And with the current situation in Afghanistan, we do see that there'll be a lot of problems which Pakistan will face and China will face. But in my view, China-Pakistan nexus will be stronger, not really economically, but militarily and strategically. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Aakriti, for this reality check and highlighting the flip side of China's BRI and the cost that it entails, economic, social, environmental, including human trafficking, the problems, and the otherwise all-weather friendship, how there are problems in that, how there is a backlash, amply demonstrated by the information that you provided. So thank you very much. Our next presenter is Malvika Nandan. Malvika, do we have Malvika?
Sir, I think she's not there. To go
All
to
right.
next.
All right. So we can go for the next presentation, which is by Raja Babu and Zahoor Ahmed. Raja Babu and Zahoor Ahmed Dar. Zahoor, yes, I can see you. Raja also. Yes, please.
Thank you so much, sir. First of all, I would like to thank NICE team and especially to Sanjay sir for gracing us this opportunity. Because of time constraints, let me directly come to the paper. So the title of our paper is Situating the Identity of Leftover Women in China. As we all know, the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, founded in July 1921, is celebrating the centenary year of its foundation. And Chinese relentless growth in the distribution of power capabilities and aspirations to become regional hegemony in Asian hemisphere is orbiting in the debates of strategic circles. However, while meandering into Chinese domestic affairs, pernicious fault lines of gender discrimination becomes discernible. President Xi Jinping, while commemorating the 25th anniversary of 4th World Conference on Women on October 1st, 2020, stated that China is committed to eliminate violence and discrimination against women. However, on the question of leftover women, it highlights how a constructed identity can sociologically be pathological as it perpetuates selective discrimination and everyday humiliation. So in this context, I think leftover women's narrative in China needs an anatomical investigation. The paper is actually divided into 3 sections. In the first section, we are critically looking into how and why leftover women as a conceptual category evolve in China. And in the second section, the paper problematizes why studying leftover women in China in current global order is significant. The third section shows application of constructivist theory of international relations to the issues of leftover women in China. So let me first start by historicizing the identity of leftover women. The term leftover women in Chinese is called shengni. It has its roots in the cultural evils as well as the policies that were adopted for the emancipation of women. So first, let's try to understand what constitutes leftover women. Leftover women refers to women aged above 26 years and do not intend to marry early or beget children. These women are more career conscious, educated, financially independent. So they prefer career over marriage. So in 2007, the Ministry of Education coined the term shengni. It is believed that coining this phrase by the government was to make society aware of their existence. This intended rationale was to highlight the prevalent skewed sex ratio causing distress to Chinese economy. So this was necessitated in the wake of the shrinking Chinese workforce. So by invoking the words into its official paper, the government tactically pressurized them to marry early or beget children. By legitimizing this act, the government regulated their reproductive choices and priorities. Historically, the term leftover women reveals the Chinese society's patriarchal mindset, which dates back to Han times, when Confucianism and the centralized administrative structure of the state shaped the Chinese family system and fixed the position of women in it. Even the accounts in the biographies of exemplary women narrates China's past stories of women valorizing their sacrifices. Also in her admonitions for women, Pan Chao promoted girls to gain mastery over 7 virtues appropriated to women. This infers that the institutionalization of patriarchy and subordination of women through historical and cultural inheritance has led to the normalization of leftover discourses, further depreciating the dignity of women. The creation of leftover women narrative and popularized by state apparatus through Chinese state-run media is what we call manufacturing consent of Shangyu. This manufacturing consent of Shangyu has attended the form of social fact in China, although this imposed identity should have been challenged by creating counter-hegemonic narratives. However, the lack of organized civil society or vibrant media under one-party rule masks the possibility of any progressive changes in this direction. So, from the foregoing discussion, we conclude that leftover women in China derives its genesis from the roots of the ancient family system and the prescriptions of Confucian saying aided by the political media nexus. Therefore, we cannot subjugate or be blind to the Chinese orthodox history of repression of leftover women. Thus, the history must be revisited and inquired. Now, coming to situating leftover women in the current global order. Many leading scholars, such as Thai and Fung, attribute the rise of one-child policy to factors such as practice of female infanticide in early years and confinement in reporting of births, abandonment of girl child at birth, and sex selective. And reports says that in 2007, Chinese women contributed a total of 41% in the GDP. However, their share of contribution comes to a high opportunity cost. Studies by All China Women's Federation suggest that around 87% female graduates have experienced some kind of gender discrimination while looking for jobs. According to IPU Women Map highlighting women in politics in 2020, only 24.9%, that is out of 2,975 seats in the legislation, only 742 are held by female politicians, with Shun Chuanlan being the only women member of the Politburo. Hence, the domestic statistics are speaking heavily against the skewed and unfavorable status of women in China. This implies that their individual rights and freedom are essentially constrained, and domestic constraints inhibit their political, socio, and economical representation, exacerbating their vulnerabilities at the hand of the state machinery. I think I should stop here. The next section will be further discussed by my colleague Zahur. Over to you, Zahur. Thank you.
Zahur, please. But please try and wind up in three minutes, if possible.
Please unmute Zahur.
Zahur, are you there?
Hello? Can you
Yes,
hear me?
Zahur. Yes, we can.
Okay, sir. So I will be briefly talking about leftover women in China from a constructivist perspective. In this context, we are applying a non-positivist framework, that is constructivist theory of IR, to engage and understand the leftover women discourse formation in China. Structure realists such as Kenneth Waltz has given importance to structure, which according to him shapes the behavior of actors. While a social constructivist such as Alexander Wendt argues that anarchy is what states make of. All these definitions of anarchy are located at the systemic level, and they do not capture the essentiality of how identities are formed within the states. Hence, we are using constructivist variables such as actors, social norms, interests, identities to situate the case of leftover women. Chinese state as the main actor constructs that identity of leftover women. The state decides what constitutes its interests and identities. In a constructivist framework, language of an actor plays a quintessential role. By invoking the word Shenyu, categories such as self versus others were deeply entrenched. This has led to the homogenization of humiliation and alienation to this affected population. In a recent article by Dar and Raja argues what is missing in Shenyu is the agency of being themselves or agency claims. Now, social norms are also central to constructivism. These created norms are highly influenced by the Chinese history. Norms come in two varieties, regulative norms and constitutive norms. Finnemore and Sicknick in life cycle identifies how normative structures evolve over a period of time. While contextualizing in leftover women's case, we find the trace of regulative norms in place since Han times. Therefore, for constructivists, norms act as a social fact, constraining and regulating the individual or collective behavior in conformity with the established order. Now, talking about interests and identities, according to Martha Finnemore and Sicknick, actors can engage in strategic social construction. To undertake massive industrial production during the reform era in China, women were reckoned as workforce, and encouraged to participate in national building, which they called as Chen Qiu. However, we can critique that the spatiality and temporality factor has been grossly underestimated by the mainstream IR theories while understanding the issue of leftover women. Now, concluding remarks. Constructivism informs our understanding that the deliberate identity formation of leftover women by the Chinese state has frustrated their participation in public spaces and pushed them into the private realm. The agency claims of leftover women being historically missing can be reclaimed by political assertion and by constructing counter-narratives to challenge this dominant identity superimposed by the Chinese state. Therefore, by problematizing this socially constructed identity, we can unmask gender-based discrimination prevalent in society writ large Chinese state. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zahur and Raju, for bringing a gendered understanding of China and away from geopolitics and such other issues, and also trying to give it a constructivist understanding and interpretation. Thank you very much for this. In many ways, a different perspective about China. Now, the next presenter is, just a minute, why I can't see the, right. Sorry, there is some problem. I can't see the program. Can someone name the next speaker? Pramodji, if you are there. Yes, now perhaps I can. Yes, the next speaker is Abhigyan Guha.
Thank you, sir. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Yes, thank you. So the title of my paper is Wolf Warrior Diplomacy and its Bleak Global Ramifications in an Age of Fractured Geopolitics. Now, putting things into perspective, the moniker of Wolf Warrior Diplomacy entails the exponential ultranationalistic, stilted and assertive strategic posture and aggressive conduct of the Chinese foreign policy dispensation in the recent years in China's quest towards global supremacy, signaling a seismic shift from Deng Xiaoping's soft strategic posture of maintaining a low profile to a belligerent foreign policy tactic propelled by bombardment of confrontational rhetoric, action-reaction phenomena, siege mentality, and self-fulfilling prophecy-driven response to Western negative narratives about Chinese domestic and international conundrums, ranging from gross human rights violations in Xinjiang and Hong Kong, the unsubstantiated investigations surrounding the origins of the coronavirus, the Chinese gambit on the Korean Peninsula, to its belligerence in the South China Sea and East China Sea. A new era has ensued. a plethora of ballistic Chinese takedowns on international criticism from its diplomatic front has crystallized its global aggressive strategy while drumming up the jingoistic sentiment in the state-centric domain at the expense of the ascendancy of messianic personality cult-driven authoritarian image of Xi Jinping as the vanguard of China's revival and the degradation of collective Chinese Communist Party leadership. A feisty cadre of aggressive Chinese diplomats helmed by Zhao Lijian and Lu Shai, accoutred with robust economic and cultural tools while hegemonizing the cyberspace, has subsequently emerged hell-bent on defending national glory, interests, and sovereignty desperately, even at the cost of supply chain resilience and segmented globalization. The current Chinese leadership describes this style of diplomacy as major country diplomacy with Chinese characteristics in pursuit of the sought-after objectives of the two centenaries and realizing the Chinese dream of great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation while developing favorable external conditions and either walk the path of peaceful development or enjoin actors so as not to concede its legitimate interests or sacrifice its national interests. The Chinese leadership has historically followed the political path of opening up and reform based on the ideology of economic developmentalism, whose necessary internal and external settings would be determined by the Chinese Communist Party. The diplomacy endorsed by Xi Jinping leadership entails the coexistence of two contradictory, collaborative and coercive approaches. The former implies expressing China's wishes to improve, ameliorate and stabilize its foreign relations, strengthening its soft power apparatus, while the latter implies strong assertion of its own claims concerning national interests, which, for instance, in the context of Japan-China relations, entail order in the East China Sea and territorial rights over the disputed Senkaku Islands and strategic actions towards realizing those territorial claims. In a document outlining the 13th five-year plan of China, the term institutional discourse power was associated with China's diplomatic posture, which signifies expansion of its decisive power to influence world peace by playing a vociferous role in global governance and the supply of global public goods. Additionally, it means increasing China's institutional voice in global economic governance, building an extensive community of interest, reinforcing China's voting rights and its rights to propose policies in institutions that shape the international order, or expanding China's footprints through the creation of parallel new global institutions like the Belt and Road Initiative and Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and securing Chinese voice therein, or spearheading the formation of institutions and organizations that relate to the international status quo in new frontiers like space, ocean flow, internet, or the North and South poles, while securing China's agenda-setting rights within this institutional framework. The key drivers like leadership preferences, operational standards and procedures within Chinese bureaucratic machinery, and domestic public policy and domestic public opinion influence the diplomatic policy-making process, which accords paramount importance to political security and maintenance of the Communist Party-led one-party system status quo. In the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Chinese foreign conduct, behind its ostensibly hardline attitude, offer a glimpse of an otherwise hidden consideration towards other countries, whereby its hostile outward stance, although superficially, has managed to make overtures by appealing directly to public opinion, and the modus operandi is newer and more diverse, as reflected in the Huawei technologies controversy and the TikTok case, where the US-China tussle over the sale of algorithms illustrate the growing dispute over Chinese share of technological resources in an era of splinter net characterized by cyberspace contestation. China is intensifying the idea of introducing its own demands and intentions in the existing world order, motivated by its deeply rooted insecurity, emboldening global trust deficit, and caustic anti-China sentiments. Public diplomacy worked counterproductively for China, notably in Hong Kong with its ruthless suppression of pro-democracy elements, as symbolized by its establishment of the national security law, resulting in the undermining of Taiwan's faith in the one country, two system principle, inviting severe criticism from the international community. Now, internalizing the inability to extricate themselves from the impediments of a paranoid and secretive political system, the Chinese diplomatic corps have exceedingly been bound by the institutions that were forged through underground revolutionary struggle, maturing at the pinnacle of the Cold War. It is essentially a system in which trivial threats loom large and where internal and external enemies become constant, wherein there's a constant tension between ontological clarity and political orthodoxy, and it becomes jarring when rubbing up against the outside world. The combative tactic of the diplomatic front has been the byproduct of the mixture of self-declared confidence and fidgety insecurity of the CCP leadership, especially since 2008, when foreign ministry officials have been engaged in an assertive stance towards diplomacy, echoing the previous episodic spells of outward aggression. And this behavior essentially reflects the newfound fortitude after the success of maneuvering through the global financial crisis, vis-a-vis the triumph of Beijing consensus, coupled with fresh insecurities about regime legitimacy and long-term stability following the 2011 Arab Spring protests. After the ascendancy of Xi Jinping and the promulgation of the Belt and Road Initiative in 2013, this new approach gained momentum as Xi moved to ruthlessly suppress dissidents, clamp down on domestic opposition, and flout international law. Now, to conclude, China's tarnished global image, especially from the perspective of human rights and international law, as demonstrated in the Uyghur genocide at Xinjiang, its trade and technological decoupling with US, aggressive maneuvers across the Indo-Pacific have been associated with wolf warrior diplomacy. Although China's obvious capital and technological capabilities is expanding its digital footprint and social media overseas as a powerful tool for disseminating information across national borders, gaining control over personal and location information, it cannot afford to demand concessions and bargain at the international arena with a strong anti-China mobilization of the international community. Now, to sum up, I would like to conclude by a few recent developments, like the March 2021 US-China Alaska meetings at Anchorage, resulting in stalemate and gridlock and mutual mudslinging, coinciding with the first summit of the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue in the same month, and the Chinese ambassador Li Jiming threatening Bangladesh against hobnobbing with the Quad, demonstrating the ramifications of wolf warrior diplomacy as China assumes that its substantive military, economic, and diplomatic leverages will limit other nations from crossing the markers it lays down. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Abhigyan, for your very emphatic, if somewhat alarmist, picture that you painted. And when I say so, I don't mean that you don't have facts on your side. I don't know, by design or otherwise, we started with a more balanced, even benign image of China and a more nuanced understanding of its various policies and rise. But slowly we moved to the flip side of the rise. And as I said, not without right reasons. Thank you. I'm very sure, and I can see that the presentations have generated a lot of interest and questions. I believe we have about 15 minutes. Am I right, Pramodji? If you are there. So I take the liberty of being the chair to start by reading out questions from the chat box, and the presenters to whom these questions are addressed, please try and respond. So the first question is question to Dr. Kiao. Could China be viewed as an expansionist and non-status quo power given its actions in South China Sea, Taiwan, and Hong Kong? Could this be a signal of China seeking to become a hegemonic power? So the old debate whether China is revisionist or status quoist, and as I said in my my presentation, my own presentation in the inaugural session, in different contexts, the same country can be revisionist or status quoist. But Dr. Kiao, would you like to respond? And you have exactly 2 minutes, no more.
So very briefly, I think that I agree with you. The dichotomies of revisionism versus status quo are often not very active to reflect a country's foreign policy orientation. So, I mean, I think even the United States, for some issues, they are revisionist. For other issues, they're status quo. So regarding China, of course, China is, as I described earlier in my presentation, China wants to revise some existing rule of the game, but China also wants to maintain, defend some other rule of the game. So I think the dichotomy cannot catch their nuanced reality. Regarding Taiwan, Hong Kong, South China Sea, I think these are each are very complicated issues. I mean, we can each topic could have another 1 hour discussions, but I don't think these three issues simply reflect China as a revisionist. So on some issues, China sees that's a sovereignty dispute, domestic security issues. I mean, even South China Sea. I mean, we could debate to what degree that's reflect China's revisionist or status quo tendency. But overall, I think China's foreign policy is more nuanced rather than this simple dichotomy. So, yeah.
What about China in Afghanistan and its decision to engage with Taliban? There is a question on that.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for the question. I think even regarding Taliban, I have 2 points. Number one, China actually has a very ambivalent attitude toward the Taliban. I'm not assume China is eager to very much recognize Taliban so soon, but China is willing to work with Taliban to see some of the political solution in Afghanistan. So that's, I think China really has a more nuanced, a more sort of ambivalent attitude toward Taliban. So number two is that I think China's consideration is rather pragmatic rather than like expansionist or ideology. So because China wants to have like a more stable Afghanistan, that's largely to some degree even compatible with the interests of other countries, including the United States. I think to some degree, China and the United States have some similar approach in a sense that one have a post sort of withdrawal, one have some political solution, seek some political solution. So I don't think China's approach toward the Taliban is an indicator of China's expansionist. It's rather, I think, reflects some pragmatic thinking of China's foreign policy. Yeah.
There is a question which is not directly addressed to you, but I suppose you would be interested in. It says China is largely marshalling the power of AI, aiming at high-tech authoritarian future with goal of algorithm governance. It has deployed its drones and other automated submarines in large numbers in Asia to counter American tech hegemony. What could be the long-term impact of Chinese tech supremacy, as well as the consequences of tech bipolarity between US and China in the region and beyond? Technology.
Yeah, I think that I partially agree that the real competition, the most urgent, the most important competition between US and China is technology. It's not about the military balance. I mean, even not about the South China Sea. I think this is a key indicator when we watch the future balance of power between the United States and China. Second point, I don't think China is easy to, it's easy for China to achieve technology supremacy. China has some advantage regarding AI, of course, given China, the size of China's economy, the size of China's market, population, but the US also maintain advantage in AI. So, and I don't think the US is losing ground, not yet. So I think that's the second point. The third point is that I think technology, AI, that to some degree strengthened China's domestic sort of authoritarian governance. But it's also, we should wait and see to what degree China has intention and a capability to export that kind of model overseas. So I think that's also uncertain. In a sense that domestically, China is applying AI to strengthen Communist Party's dominance in domestic politics. But to what degree that could really exportable, could be exported to other countries? I think that's we should wait and see. So yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Xiao, for clarifying these issues. Question for Anu Anwar. Anu,
Yes.
can we add BRI and China's capability to develop mega infrastructure one of the factors for Chinese rise?
I think yes and no to some extent. The answer would be because there is a sign is saying it's a Yao Zifu Xian Shi Lu. It's meaning basically that if you want to develop, build infrastructure. So if you look at the Chinese policy paper and the way they perceive the development process, is kind of they give the physical infrastructure building of those kind of mega infrastructure is one of the key determinant to develop a kind of a nation building. And over the years, the capability China has achieved, I think, is kind of unparalleled in terms of the physical infrastructure. If you look at high-speed railway and the highways and kind of impressive buildings and so on. And every year, thousands of civil engineers come out from university in China, which number is unparalleled to other countries. So BRI is kind of what China wants to do. It can be summarized as a kind of Chinese foreign policy summarization. So now BRI include health, Silk Road, digital Silk Road, everything. So I think that the ambition of the BRI, it could be one of the components of the Chinese rise narrative, but it will largely depend how it's gonna execute, because it's still in the primary stage, not even 10 years, and we aim to continue for another 20 years or so. So if it executes successfully in the coming years, then it could be. But as we see now that there is significant backlash from Western country, and we have seen the negative impact in Sri Lanka and elsewhere. So it yet to be seen. But at the beginning stage, we can predict that in the direction China wish to go, it could be one of the categorization or the factor of the rise of China.
Thank you very much, Anu. We have a request from Gaurav Bhattarai. Only the organizers can tell us whether we can give him floor for 2 minutes. He wants to comment on Dr. N. Singh's presentation on India, Nepal, China.
We can unmute him. Let's see.
Yes, Mr. Gaurav Bhattarai, but you have only 2 minutes. Kindly unmute Dr. Gaurav Bhattarai, Pramodji, if you can, if we allow, yes.
Thank you, Chair. Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Please go ahead.
Just have a few reflections regarding the presentation made by Dr. Nipendra Singh, like how India accepts China-Nepal ties, because before modern India was established in 1947, bilateral relations between the Himalayan country of Nepal and Nepal and China remain really undisturbed. The intermittent presence of British India and Tibet as a factor in China-Nepal relations during the period of colonialism cannot be denied, however. But after Indian independence and Tibet being an integral part of China-Nepal relations did.
We can't hear you, Gauravji.
Largely because of the emergence of modern India, which since its inception has perceived, I think, communist China as an existential threat. Because the Indian view of China-Nepal relation today appears to carry the same existential threat perception. For this reason, New Delhi leaves no stone unturned to foil Nepal's attempts to get closer to Beijing. So it may sound paradoxical to know that every move that Nepal makes towards China is triggered by New Delhi. Firstly, by limiting Nepal's engagements with China and shaping Nepal's China ties in its favor. Secondly, by exercising a kind of what is reported as quote-unquote interventionist approach or policy in the neighborhood, India has pushed Nepal closer to China, shaping ties, but not in its favor. Because when India announced the new route to reach the mountain resort of Kailash Mansarovar in Tibetan Autonomous Region of China by Lipulekh, Kathmandu really waited for Beijing's response. That's because the two Asian giants that agreed in 2015 to use the pass for trade and pilgrimage without Nepal's consent. Despite Kathmandu having long disputed the pass near the trilateral junction of its northwestern border with India and China. So almost 2 weeks after the inauguration of new route, China's foreign ministry diplomatically stated that no unilateral action should be taken at the junction. In those weeks,
Gauravji, I think you have made your point. We could understand what you are trying to say.
Exactly. Just let me conclude with just because today, as a new world order is on the threshold of emerging, Nepal has new aspirations and it seeks its. If India continues paying heed to Nepal's earrings, there is no doubt that Kathmandu will be persistently, attracted to Beijing as it seeks to be linked to global value chain. And it shouldn't be seen as a kind of paradigm shift or a change in the status quo. Almost, I think, all of Nepal governments so far, whether communist, democratic, or authoritarian, have pursued a shared geopolitical tactic that is creeping to the shade in the north to avoid the heat from the south. So still, friendship with all and enmity with none has been the core principle of Nepal's foreign policy.
Yes, we have understood, Gauravji. Thank you. I would like to give 1 minute to Dr. Nripend in case he wants to respond, but please don't take more time. Nripendji, if you want to respond, you have 1 minute. Otherwise, we have an intervention from one of the panelists. Aaron addresses his co-panelist saying, what do you make of China-India strategic competition in South Asia? Who is winning or who has the upper hand? Does anyone have anything to say on this? Or maybe I can ask Aaron to respond to his own question.
Yeah,
you please clarify what you have to say. Or Anu can say, Aaron, I would want you to speak for 1 minute on this.
Okay.
And then Anu.
Okay.
Dr. Sanjay, my point here, sir, is that basically, from what I've heard, some Southeast Asian countries are falling within the, sphere of influence of China, and some say that China has a counter-containment strategy against India. So I'd like to hear the thoughts of my South Asian colleagues here.
Yeah. Thank you. I think I will be very brief. So South Asia is always considered as India considers itself as a South Asia's kind of its own sphere of influence, which has been the case for a long time. And China was more inward policy for a long time. We have seen before the opening up, right? China never wanted to engage in the outer world for a long time. It hasn't any capacity, basically, even it wished to. But as we have seen that China's capacity has increased drastically, its engagement also increased in its periphery. And from Chinese strategic point of view, South Asia is one of the key regions where China needs to be engaged. If you look at the Bay of Bengal, if you look at the Indian Ocean, where China require access strategically. And not to mention that China has been a long-standing relation with Pakistan, which has so many dynamics. And Pakistan sees itself China as a balancer against India. So that dynamic was always playing there. And India is on one side and China, Pakistan in the other side. And the other South Asian country, which is comparatively that we can call it non-nuclear sixth country, those are always hedging between one against another. But long time it was under the kind of influence of India. But now, as you mentioned in your question also, that the balance has been shifting a kind of drastically, primarily because of the Chinese capacity. China can offer substantial aid, whether it's come to infrastructure, finance, trade, and so on. which is the basically kind of a dire need of South Asian country. Even India wished to provide them, but India lacked capacity. That's the main restriction. Even the South Asian country has a strong cultural and historical linkage with India, but an state affair cannot go through only with non-material aspect of the relationship. When it comes to the material aspect of relationship, finance, infrastructure, military ties, and investment, trade, and so on and so forth, we have seen that bilateral engagement with other South Asian countries has increased dramatically, which basically gave China as a kind of foundation to engage with other countries, not to mention Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka. So these dynamics are changing in South Asia. And I hope that, and I believe that as we move forward, it will continue to emerge, but India may play a greater role with the assistance of Japan, US, and other if Indo-Pacific strategy going to formulate in more structural way.
Thank you, Anu Anwar. In fact, you have amply clarified the issue. If I may add, although as chair, I don't want to take sides on this issue, but Anu Anwar talked about the issue of capabilities. And one point which he hinted perhaps not enough is the fact that since independence, India has adopted a very proactive foreign policy, a high-profile foreign policy with NAM and all. Also the fact that India had borders or historical, cultural, geographical borders and linkages with all the other countries of South Asia, that created problems of its own. Also having common borders. China had the advantage of initially for 50 years lying low, building capacity, and then with the help of that capacity, it can now follow a proactive foreign policy. It also doesn't have borders with most South Asian countries except India, where there are problems. So it's a very complex issue. Anu Anwar has highlighted certain points. Professor Poo, what's your take on China-US Thucydides trap? It seems that US has played all possible cards against China simultaneously: Hong Kong, Xinjiang, Taiwan, South China Sea, COVID-19. But I'm afraid we don't have time. We have almost run out of time. So I don't think we have time to take this question. Organizers, over to you. But it was an extremely interesting session where we heard various viewpoints. And as I said, from a more balanced and nuanced understanding of China to an understanding which highlights the problems associated with China's rise and the apprehensions of threat that it has created among the neighbors and worldwide. So all that has been covered in this session. I thank all the panelists for making very good presentations, for coming out with their positions and understanding and formulations on the issue. Thank you all. Pramodji.
Distinguished Chair, speakers, ladies and gentlemen, as we have come to the end of this session, we would like to express a sincere gratitude and thanks to the Chair for agreeing to chair and moderate the session today. Our sincere thanks also goes to all the speakers for being a part of the event and delivering such comprehensive and convincing presentations. We would like to acknowledge our gratitude to our friends from the diplomatic community, experts, academia, media, and different organizations. Finally, we must also mention our deep sense of appreciation for the audience who participated in the webinar and those who are watching us live. Thank you for your valuable time and attention and for making this session productive with your questions. Once again, we are truly honored to have you all with us today. Please do join us in the next session. Thank you so much.